Welcome back to Guest on the Mecha, and in today's episode we are back with a bit of a preview into 2022 anime. There's a lot of anime coming out this year, and this episode I didn't plan to do this episode initially. I was going to do this much later into the year, if not at the beginning of next year, but we might as well do it now. And so this episode, I kind of want to start my end of year content by giving you a bit of a preview into the anime that I'm getting into this year, or next year, I mean, and what anime projects have really taken my interest. Because, of course, this is an episode of Guest in the Mecha, I am going to be talking about these anime more like projects than I am like stories, even though I will kind of refer to the stories at some points. So expect a lot of staff related talk and things of that nature. And then at the end of this podcast, I'm going to try and get to a bit of a meta point to sort of wrap things up as to my view on the fact that there is a lot of anime coming out in 2022. But before we do get to the podcast, though, there is a bit of business to attend to. Recently, Spotify dropped reviews, so you can review the podcast now, which I find really awesome. At least you can leave a rating. And so I asked a few of you guys on Twitter to leave a 5-star review, or just if you enjoy it, to leave a 5-star rating. I'm so used to saying review because I'm also on Apple, which you can still do, by the way. But we have a few reviews, and if you are on the video podcast, I'm just going to show them on the screen. We have ratings from Selena, we have a review from Aaron, EyecatchGlasses, Inspirashamul, Nico, and Dimitri is also my editor at Full Frontal. So yeah, thank you. All of you, thank you so much for the reviews or the ratings. It's very appreciated, and it will hopefully help support the show on Spotify, because I know there are quite a few Spotify listeners that wanted to rate the show and they didn't really know how to because they didn't have Apple devices, something like that. So ratings on Spotify are really helpful. So thank you very much. And if you do also want to be like these other cool people, then please do leave a rating on Spotify and I will feature you at the beginning of the episode. So let's get into this week's episode let's get into the podcast for this week. That is episode 109 of Get in the Mecha. There's a lot of anime coming out in 2022. We're gonna waste no time and just dive right into the first anime. I'm gonna divide this into series and films, and there'll be a few perhaps honorable mentions here and there, but overall we're talking about perhaps 2 shows in detail and 2 films in detail. So the first one, which I am really excited for, that also made the thumbnail for this episode, and that is Akebi-chan's Sailor Uniform, which comes out on the 9th of January in Japan, and the synopsis for this is pretty simple. It's a slice of life school anime about a girl called Akebi who basically gets into a school called Robot Academy, and she wants to wear a sailor uniform and meet loads of people at this girls' school. So that is literally it. I'm gonna precast this by saying that I'm also really hyped for this anime, of course, but I'm also kind of scared as well. But what really is the appeal of this anime for me? It sounds like the most slice of life thing in the book, and it is, and that's kind of what I like. I'm really into this sort of, I don't call it pure slice of life, but I just love seeing people just do things and succeed and have a good time in anime. And that does sound a bit absurd, maybe to some people. It's like, where's the drama? Where's the conflict? I do plan on doing a podcast on conflict in non-conflict related anime, but that's for another day. But what really draws me to this anime is partially just how simple the narrative seems and how refreshing it is, but also, of course, visually it looks stunning, and maybe some of the best looking TV anime hopefully, if it manages to maintain the quality, coming out next year. Based on, of course, the credits we got, we are having character designs from none other than Megami Kono, which look honestly incredible. They're this really cool mix of looking kind of authentic and also kind of drawn, but at the same time, they look really modern and fresh, and you could argue rather 2021 in their look. Also, if you scroll down to the very bottom of the AniDB staff list, which I do regularly for these podcast episodes, you can find a credit called Character Retouch, which is being done by Capsule. And essentially what this character retouch is, it's kind of like what Wit Studio's been doing on Vivi, which I would say that is what really introduced me to what they call makeup animation, which is kind of like these quite radical lighting changes and like photography changes applied to the character. How they do this is still a bit of a mystery to me. I don't really know the process behind it, but there are these shots in Vivi where you get these really detailed close-ups on her, and it's a very similar idea, but that's being done by Capsule and it's being called Character Retouch, which looks really appealing, and they really show it off in the trailer. Furthermore, this show is being led by a lot of talented female creatives. Of course, director Miyuki Koruki is the one leading this show, and you also have a pretty long list as well. Of course, character designer Kono, which we mentioned. Rino Yamazaki is doing series composition and the script. We have Kano Utatane, who is doing music. Akira Saito is doing editing. Yaso Usui, who is doing art directing, or she's one of the art directors. Asuka Yokuta, who is doing color design, and so on. So this anime is being led by a lot of female staff, and that makes me really excited, as well as, of course, the cast as well, which is mainly women. And why does this excite me? It really excites me because a lot of the discourse regarding anime creatives is very male dominated. There's definitely a need for more representation of women in the anime industry, in my view, but also better representation in the discourse as well. And also when it comes to, of course, talking about female creators, I would say that the discourse is very narrow. It's not to say that it doesn't exist, and that's the case, but it's more so it's very narrow and limited to very few female creators. And so I hope an anime like this really succeeds, so that discussion can hopefully be expanded a bit more, even though of course it should be expanded regardless, but I hope that conversation can be widened up a bit more. Why am I so scared about this show though? And it's really because of I'm very unsure as to what is going on with Cloverworks and the fact that they have a lot of anime slated for 2022. As this is being recorded, that number is up to 6, which isn't I want to say normal number, or at least a number that you hear of too often for an anime studio, besides maybe one other one, which I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. This anime represents good things in my view, and hopefully it will be able to realize that ambition and hopefully open up the discourse a bit more. So we're walking on a few eggshells, but hopefully things go well with Akebi-chan. On to the next anime, and this one is The Orbital Children, which goes up on Netflix on the 28th of January. And I'm basing my synopsis based on the one provided by Netflix, and essentially it is a story. It's set in the year 2045 when AI have advanced and anyone can go into space. The synopsis then goes to talk about how there are children who are born on the moon and children who are born on Earth, and then they go on a trip to a Japanese built space station. So that's the very basic thing around it, but there's a lot more that I really want to get to when it comes to this anime that I'm really, really excited about. Of course, this is an anime directed by none other than Mitsuo Iso, maybe one of the more famous names in the world of Japanese animation, at least when it comes to animators. And what they're probably most famous for is their animation work on Evangelion, namely the 1995 series, as well as, of course, the end of Evangelion. and loads of other animation stuff too, like Blood the Last Vampire. You may know them for their very like animalistic movement if you're not aware of like their directorial stuff. The Asuka versus Manufactured Eva series fight is maybe their most famous thing to date, and it is still a legendary fight to this day. Maybe one of the best fight scenes ever made in the space of an anime. And then we have two other names. We have Toshiyuki Inoue, who I have also mentioned on many past episodes, and animation extraordinaire is really the best way I can put it. And from Blue Submarine #6 to Millennium Actress to also Evangelion, apparently everyone worked on Evangelion, and he's really done it all. And just to add to that, we also have Kenichi Yoshida, who's known for their character designs on anime like Eureka 7 and Gundam G Reckonista, and they feature as character designer on the show. And I think I didn't mention that Toshiyuki Inoue is credited as main animator on this show, so I think that's pretty self-explanatory. So the staff on their own really get me pumped for this anime, but what gets me more pumped is really, it comes down to Den-Oh Coil. And for those who don't know, Den-Oh Coil was a series directed by Isso in 2007, or aired in 2007. It's not the most known series ever, but it has, I would say, quite a bit of acclaim behind it, and I really like it. It's definitely a good series, very worth checking out, very solid show. Den-Oh Coil was great when I watched it last year, and I'm just going to go into a bit of a spiel about Den-Oh Coil, and I'll link it back. And so Den-Oh Coil was a really great show when I watched it. I finished it this year, and it's one of the most consistent shows you'll watch from a visual point of view. That's always the thing I say, but it's true. There's no episode that doesn't move. It doesn't really melt in the middle. It's a very consistently even baked product. I hate calling anime product, but you get what I'm trying to say. It also has beautiful standalone episodes. The anime looks really nice. It's again really consistent. It's so layered in terms of its writing and everything. However, one of my few issues with this show are really the final few episodes and the climax, and how repetitive it sometimes feels. I don't like saying that because I genuinely really like this anime, but I just couldn't turn my head from it. It got to the point to which I just genuinely had to, like, not call it out, but I couldn't look past it because it really got to me when it's a really good show. But towards the end, it kind of got to the point which it was kind of dumping information and saying all these things in a very, I would say very, I really don't know how to describe it, but in a very boring and mundane way. And it kind of felt like it just needed to squeeze it in towards the end, in my view. And this is coming from a team that's really good when it comes to like the visual storytelling stuff. And so that kind of surprised me. But this is why I'm super interested in the Orbital Children, because it is much shorter. It looks really interesting, and I'm sure will probably be just as interesting as Den-Oh Coil as a narrative. Because it's shorter, of course, there's only so much it can say, but I think the limitations are good, and I think great media comes out of limitation to some extent. It's also set in space, so that's automatically good. And also the team just seems, at least from the names we've gotten, seems just as strong as before. Isso has a magnetism, apparently, because everyone wants to work on his shows, and he gets some of the best animators on his shows. Den-Oh Coil literally has animators that almost exclusively work on movies. So it's a big deal, and I'm sure Isso can pull it off. So the real question for me is can Isso pull it off? Can Isso bring it back, so to speak? As I think Den-Oh Coil was maybe on the brink of being a masterpiece, but didn't quite make it. So the Orbital Children is kind of the next step in the Isso narrative for me. On to some honorable mentions. I'm just going to skim through these really quickly. We have Vampire in the Garden and Exception, both of which on Netflix. I know everything is on Netflix these days. These are two series which we know very little about, but what makes me really hyped for these are the character designers who are working on these. We have Tetsuya Nishio for Vampire in the Garden, another acclaimed animator, also has worked on Evangelion. Also, Naruto as well is something they're really famous for. And then for exception, that comes from Yoshitaka Amano, who you may know for their work on Final Fantasy, but I'm more familiar with some of their other like anime related stuff, namely because I've never actually played a Final Fantasy game. I know, shocking. I mostly know them for their work on the film 1001 Nights. So these series have some cool names behind them. Again, we know very little about either of these, but I just want to see what will come out of them, and hopefully these character designs also have great animation to come with them and great creatives to come with them too. And then another one which isn't at least for now, hasn't been said to be on Netflix, that is Bocchi the Rock. When we did that episode in Sunny Boy episode 8, I mentioned Keishiro Saito quite a lot because he storyboarded, directed, and did animation direction for that episode, as well as another episode, Sunny Boy as well. They didn't do AD though. And this show is being led by Keishiro Saito himself. This is his debut as a series director, not necessarily debut as a sort of main director, so to speak, because they co-directed Aka 13 Regards with Shingo Natsume, and that was also very great, and I recommend that too, as well as I do Sunny Boy as a whole and Sunny Boy episode 8. So very good things for a very great creative. The same goes for Keorera as well, who also did character designs for this show. And if you haven't already, watch One Direct Priority. I know there is quite a lot of negative-ish press around One Direct because of the ending, but it's very much worth watching, especially if you are into animation and so on, because there is some incredible stuff in here, and it's also just a really well told story for the most part. So check it out. They did some great key animation stuff on it, and they also did some really great animation direction on it as well. So worth checking out One Direct Priority in preparation for Bocchi on the Rock, as well as Sunny Boy. Now let's dive into our films section, and films are usually things I don't talk about very often. I mostly talk about series because of the constant stream of them and also the release date as well. You're most likely going to get the series coming out in Japan and a few hours later in wherever you live, at least if you live in a Western country, or at least somewhere that has access to these various streaming services or simulcast or whatever. So films are usually a bit weird because they usually do come out a long time later, or the synchronization is just really weird for this sort of like type of anime. But I'm going to talk about two because these are two that I might actually have the potential to watch this year, or at least I hope I will. So for the first one, we have Inu-Oh, which is the new Yuasa movie, and that comes out in the summer of 2022, at least for me, but that of course depends on where you live. And this anime, at least from what I got from the synopsis, is basically about the relationship between these two characters. It's a historical anime, and that's the relationship between this character called Inu-Oh and Tomina, and one of them can sing, one of them can dance, and things kind of just go off from there. Again, not too much to say. Directed by Yuasa, I have no choice but to watch it, but it also is being directed, or at least we have assistant director Fugu Yamashiro, who storyboarded and directed episode 11 of Heikemonogatari. And I'm sure everyone is tired of me talking about Heikemonogatari, so I'm not going to go on about it too much, but this anime is something of a derivative of Heikemonogatari. I've heard in some places it's called Heikemonogatari the Inu-Oh chapters, so there's like a definite relationship between these two anime. Because I've been watching like Mushishi and I'm about to start Rakugo soon, so I just thought that this would be a nice thing to throw in there because it kind of, it's part of the things I've been watching and enjoying lately. So that is something that's definitely on my radar, has been on my radar for a while because it has aired in Venice. It's going to be in a French film festival soon. So if you can see it, like definitely see it. But I will have to wait for a while in order to finally see Inu-Oh. And then the final work I wanted to mention that I've said the word excited so many times in this podcast, but I don't really know what else to use. I don't know, like enthused. But so So the final work, which I am very enthused to watch, is The Girl from the Other Side, which comes out in the March of 2022. And the synopsis from Production IG goes as follows. Once upon a time, in a land far away that was divided into two realms, the outside was run by terratomorphic creatures who had the power to curse whoever they touched. Humans could live safely only in the inside. When a lost girl in the inside named Shiva and a demonic beast-looking outsider simply known as Teacher initiate a quiet coexistence on the same side of the forest, their bond seems to transcend their incompatible natures. It is the beginning of a folktale about two outcasts, one human, one inhuman, who linger in the hazy twilight that separates night from day. So the synopsis is very intriguing. I don't think I've read a synopsis this good, and I'm not gonna lie. When you are listening to this podcast, it is edited down, and I stumbled a bunch of times trying to read it because I haven't read a synopsis like this detailed before. Saying like terratomorphic creatures, like oh my gosh, there's just so much in here. This project is a very like creator-driven project, and that's what gets me really hyped about it. All the way back in the early episodes of the show, I think it was in the 20s or something like that, I name dropped one of my favorite creatives in the indie scene and one of my favorite animators in general, Yutaro Kubo. And it turns out that he, alongside Satomi Maya, are working on a feature film for this work at Wit Studio, and this is an adaptation of the manga or of the same name. And this was previously an OVA by Wit Studio, which evolved into this project. Visually, it is very crafted around their aesthetics, which I absolutely love. I have to point you to some of their commercial work. When I say commercial, I mean like TV commercial stuff, as well as they've done some stuff in some music videos. And of course, they have some short films as well. And they kind of have this really great, like, sketchy style that feels almost like it's alive. The animation feels alive. And I will go back to that point that I always say, I love when anime feels like it's made by people. And this feels like that. It feels like it's drawn, it's created, and you can feel that creative process when you're watching the animation in itself. Luckily, I've had the honor of watching some of Kubo's older stuff. I'm a bit unfamiliar with Maya's stuff, but I know they have worked together, and so I've basically kind of seen their career and aesthetic evolve, and I can't wait to see this thing. I think it's quite interesting because we don't get things like this very often, at least things that look like this being sold. Besides maybe some of the young animator project stuff, indie films and music videos, and short film collections, we don't really see this in the quote commercial anime scene. Whether this is like a quote commercial work per se intending to make loads of money is something I'm not too sure about, and I would be more inclined to say no. However, I think that there's very much a lot of creative potential in this, and I've seen quite a lot of people latch onto this because we simply don't get stuff like this. So I'm very excited for this work. I'm very happy for Kubo and Maya, and hopefully this also spreads the word about who they are, because they are two amazing creators making amazing stuff in the industry right now. So we're pretty much at the end of the episode, but I want to end on one more point, and it's a bit of a doomer point. I didn't mean to end on a doomer point, but sometimes you kind of have to when it comes to the anime industry, I think. And I think I named this podcast, There's a Lot of Anime Coming Out in 2022. And again, I don't want to be a doomer, but I think the idea that there is a lot of anime in 2022, although that sounds like a great thing, and yes, I have showed excitement throughout this entire podcast episode, but that idea is very much like an assumption that it's a good thing when I don't think it exactly is a good thing, unfortunately. Obviously, as a viewer, when there is loads of anime coming out, and from a consumer, you might be, yeah, there's so much to watch, this is great, but I say partially it is a bit, it's a bit of a challenge as a viewer because you obviously can't watch everything. It kind of causes a bit of choice paralysis, and that kind of screws me up a lot because I just never know what to watch, and I kind of decide on something, and it's just usually an older show because there's just too much these days. But also, and more importantly, from the industry standpoint, I think this is something that the anime industry can't sustain. We're very lucky to have this many anime to watch, I guess, but it's very much being pumped out through a broken system. And it makes me very scared each year when I go onto my anime list or whatever and I see the myriad of shows that are coming out every season, because there's just too much and there are too little people to make it, and there's too little time to make it as well, as we've seen with so many anime. Kind of just to link this back to it being an end of year episode, there have been so many productions that are going through issues this year. This year is just one example of many years, but this year there have been just so many, and so I can't help think that how is the anime industry really going to manage this going forward? It scares me quite a lot that there is so much anime, but I guess at least if you were to find a silver lining in it, I'm happy that there are at least some really interesting creative projects being created. So if you were to take something away from this podcast, of course, I'm excited, and I think you should be excited for some of the anime that's coming out beyond just these shows. There are so many shows, and I know there are a lot of more mainstream stuff coming out this year that more people are excited for. I'm not as excited for those, but I'm still somewhat excited. I will be watching those, but it's of course always worth noting how they come about and being aware of how anime comes about. And I think just it's worth keeping in the back of your mind when you are watching seasonal anime and all these things coming out, that these aren't being created easily. The amount that we have isn't here for no reason and out of thin air. This is through, unfortunately, crunch and various other means to get it out. And yeah, I think that is worth thinking about when you watch seasonal anime and when you consider the fact that there are so many anime coming out in 2022. On that note, on a very sad note, that is the end of this week's podcast. Thank you for listening and taking the time to either watch or listen. For everyone that left a rating, thank you so much. And I will encourage anyone who hasn't left a rating on Spotify to do so, as it is a new feature. And eventually, as we get enough ratings, then it will actually show a number. I'm hoping that'll be a nice 5, because I'm hoping everyone left a 5-star review or rating. And also, of course, you can still leave a review on Apple Podcasts, and you can actually leave words in that as well. So that would be very helpful, and I would also really appreciate that. And like always, I will feature those on the show. If you do leave one, then just send me an @ on Twitter or send it to my email. That's getinthemecha@gmail.com. That's getinthemecha@gmail.com. Or just, at me on Twitter. That's @getinthemecha. Very same name as this podcast, my YouTube channel. And I'll feature it on the show. So that is that. Thank you for listening, and I will see you on another episode of Get in the Mecha. The music in this production goes as follows. Synthwave by Alex McCulloch. Hi, it's me again from the future with a few post-credit notes. The first one is that I realized that I messed up a bunch of names when I was editing this podcast, and so I realized with the Akebi-chan names, I really flubbed most of those. And so what I want to do is basically make that right and repeat the entire list that I mentioned in the episode. So just to go through it again, we have Miyuki Kuroki, who is doing direction. We have Rino Yamazaki, who's doing the script. We have Kana Utatane, who's doing the music. Akari Saito, who's responsible for editing. Hisayo Usui is one of the art directors. And we have Asuka Yokota, who is doing color design. On the Heikimon Guitari stuff, I realized that I said episode 11 rather than episode 10. I knew it was episode 10, but I ended up saying episode 11, so apologies for that. So Fugi Yamashiro storyboards and directs episode 10 of Heikimon Guitari, the episode prior to the finale. And one last thing, and this isn't really a correction, it's just the fact that this is probably the last episode that I'm going to be able to get out before the new year. So happy new year to everyone listening, and thank you so much for supporting this podcast for as long as you have, or for however long you have. It means a lot, and I will hopefully see you in the new year. Have a nice holiday, have a nice restful break, and yeah, we'll get back to getting the mecha in the new year. So thank you for listening, and that's it from me.